Now, if you're a creative, I'm pretty sure you'll agree that the XPS 15 is a really popular choice. You get a great hardware, great design, in a pretty nice chassis, so on and so forth. But if you're looking for something a little more portable, can this, the XPS 13 2-in-1, replace your XPS 15? Let's find out. If you are familiar with the XPS line of laptops, you will definitely recognize its iconic two-tone color scheme. It's an all-metal build made out of CNC machined aluminum in that familiar silver, while the keyboard deck is made out of a carbon fiber composite in black. That means it pretty much still looks like an XPS, but for us creatives, the most important thing is the display. You get a 13.4-inch panel in a 16:10 aspect ratio. For those of you who don't really know, most laptops out there use a standard 16:9 aspect ratio, which is fine for general use and most entertainment. But when you're editing photos or even video editing, that slight increase in vertical space is much appreciated. It actually gives you just enough extra space for things like your tools or tabs. I would also say that with the MacBook still using that aspect ratio of 16:10, that proves the point. Even so, you still get thin bezels all around, and you'll be glad to know that the webcam is in its ideal position up top. As for the panel itself, you actually get a choice between two options. Either a Full HD 1920 by 1200 IPS display or 4K 3840 by 2400 IPS display, both of which supports touch. Our model comes equipped with the 4K option. And to be honest, it's just too much. Like seriously, why? If you're looking to get this laptop, just get the Full HD option. Although the 4K panel does support Dolby Vision and is HDR 400 rated, at this screen size, 4K doesn't really make sense, especially with window scaling. So I repeat, just go for the Full HD option. It's plenty great. And for those of you who want an OLED option, not today, but maybe in the future. Regardless, the display is really nice and you'll be able to view your photos and videos with increased clarity, especially when you zoom in. It also handles a max brightness of over 500 nits, so it's totally usable outdoors. Of course, this is a 2-in-1, so you can flip the display a full 180 and use it as a tablet. It's on the bulkier side, but it is what it is. The new hinge design is really robust, and although it is on the stiffer side, you will still be able to easily open the lid with one finger, and the display wouldn't wobble that much. You can also get an optional pen, which might be great for some of you out there to take down notes or perhaps even do design or draw in Photoshop. This next bit that I want to touch on is something that I really did not enjoy, and that's the keyboard. There's nothing wrong with the keyboard per se. In fact, the keys are larger than standard and all the important keys such as Control, Shift and Backspace are all nice and big. I rarely made any mistakes on this keyboard. There's also even a fingerprint reader for Windows authentication. My issue with this keyboard is the actuation. It's too low profile for my liking. In my experience, it almost feels like typing on the MacBook keyboard with the butterfly switches. If you're a fan of that keyboard, great. If you're not, this is not as bad as that, but I would say it still comes down to personal preference. For me, nah. The trackpad on the other hand is really nice. It has a glass surface and it runs precision drivers. It's smooth to use even with gestures, and both the left and right clicks are decent. If you're out in the field, editing photos or even videos, it will definitely suffice. We now move on to ports, and well, there isn't much. You get two USB-C ports on either side, both supporting Thunderbolt 3, along with your trusty headphone jack and a micro SD card reader. Of course, this also means that it charges via USB-C with the included 45-watt AC adapter. That's actually pretty compact, bringing down the overall weight of the entire system. And that's actually an advantage of going with a smaller laptop. As for USB-C, it's kind of the norm for thin and light laptops nowadays, but Dell does include a USB-C to A adapter in the box, so you have that option. Personally, I would have also liked to see a full-size SD card reader, but given the micro SD card reader, if you're a frequent drone flyer, for example, it might suffice for you. Lastly, you also get a pair of decent sounding speakers, which are downward firing, and there's also a small LED light strip on the lower lip that tells you the battery level as it's being charged. So that's the XPS 13 2-in-1 in general, its features and overall build quality. But we now come to the most important part, performance. Our unit comes with the Intel Core i7-1065G7, 16GB of RAM at 3733 MHz, and a 512GB NVMe SSD. As usual, on our channel, we ran Cinebench and Davinci Resolve, and these are our results. The Core i7-1065G7 scored a multi-core performance of 1438 with a single core performance of 343. Compare this to the previous generation Core i7-8565U on the ASUS that we tested previously. It is a slight improvement. Not much, but still an improvement. As for Davinci Resolve, our 10-minute 1080p render took about 51 minutes, while our 4K 15-minute render took over 1.5 hours. In all honesty, do not touch 4K on this laptop. If you really want to edit, I would say use Premiere Pro and stick to 1080p. If you did also notice, the results were a little worse compared to the 8565U, but that's most likely because of the thermal solution, in which the ASUS had a little bit more leeway thanks to the added thickness. But if you're looking at just editing photos in Lightroom or Photoshop, the 10th Gen Intel Core i7 in here will definitely do you great. Browsing through photos has almost zero to no lag, and the editing process was smooth. The 512GB NVMe SSD on the other hand is slightly lacking. Read speeds are great, above 2GB per second, but write speeds are on the lower side, especially if you compare to other laptops out there at just over 1.2GB per second. This time around, we didn't really touch gaming for this review, and honestly, you shouldn't get an XPS for gaming. If you really want to game, light titles like CSGO or Minecraft will give you a decent experience. But seriously, if you want to game, just don't get an XPS. One more thing to touch upon, that's battery life. Personally, I got about 8 hours and 5 minutes on the better battery setting, and my usage was basically browsing, a bit of documents, and even Lightroom. So according to Dell, it's pretty much there, especially for the 4K display. Of course, your results will vary according to your usage, but for most of you out there, I'm pretty sure you'll be pleased. Overall, can the XPS 13 2-in-1 replace your XPS 15? To a certain extent, yes and no. It really depends on what you use it for. If you're just looking at photo editing in Lightroom or graphic design in Photoshop, the XPS 13 2-in-1 will be a great option. If you're looking at more 3D work or 4K video editing, then I would say stick to your XPS 15. The inclusion of a dedicated GPU makes a huge difference. Drop us a comment if you have any questions, subscribe to us if you haven't, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Till the next one, see ya.